Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank you for your presence. First Tech, which is a long-term partner of ours and is sponsoring this event. Our idea here is to tell about data protection and how it can speed up the digital transformation. All the innovation processes deal with innovation and protecting data and ensure that they are safe can make this digital transformation faster. So we're going to talking about Thales. For those who don't know, Thales is a global leader in many sectors. So they're leaders in satellites, communication satellites, payment methods, airspace control. Around 80% of the airspace in Brazil is controlled by Thales. So we have credit card. If you look at the verse of your credit card, you're gonna find one with Thales or Gemalto, which is a company owned by Thales. So we're more present in people's life than they think. And we're gonna be talking about cybersecurity. And I work in this area, showing how data protection can help us in the digital transformation process. In terms of data protection, we're leaders in many segments. 80% of transactions in the world are processed by Thales solutions. We're here with working with the main banks and the most important companies with data protection. Our goal here is to talk about usage cases in terms of data protection law, and after that, we can have a chat in our booth so we can start to talk about how we're going to do it later on. So I'm going to present some figures now. These figures were actually surprising, but if cyber threats were considered a country, it would be the third economy in the world, behind just China and the US. So I would have thought it was drug trafficking, but actually cyber crimes is much stronger. So in 2023, we believe that cyber crimes are going to become the second economy in the world. One of the most addressed risks in this documentary is the importance of data protection. Why is that? Because we're working with digital methods, so information has to be shared, and we're going to be talking about the data protection law. So it's there for us to share information safely. So we need to more and more be concerned about providing security and safety for data. So I'm going to present some more figures here. At times you can second guess if you should invest or not in safety. And the cost here in Brazil, the average cost is 7 million. So that's the average cost. We have some higher and lower costs, but that's the average cost, 7 million reais. And the trend is for that to grow in 2023. So if we stop to think about and look at the risk of being cyber attacked, have your data stolen, or be a victim of ransomware. So this ransom could jeopardize your operations, and it's better for you to proactively think about how you can protect your data. So we have been talking with clients, and we need to get out of this theme that investing in safety is a cost, and actually shape their way of seeing that it's actually an investment. And when we mention control, we can be referring to processes, but if you have like a big four consultancy service, it's easier to control and see budget because control leads you back to the business. So data protection should be seen as a technological protection. So talking about ransomware, the government is one of the most targeted institutions. Why is that? Because the most vulnerable clients are sought after. So, and the tendency is that to grow even further, and for us to notice growth in ransomware. So, ransomware is basically a person who will kidnap your data, and then they kidnap you per se, and then they ask you for ransom to give back your data. Some of them are actually just attacking to damage you. So if you're referring to a pipeline in the US, for instance, the key for decrypting your data, it, it wasn't that good, so it was actually really hard for them to bring their data back. And that's why we're going to talk about Thales solutions. We usually say that we're the good type of ransomware. Before the ransomware goes in and cryptograph your data, so that's one of the usage cases. We have some more important data here to present. I always say that not taking care of your security is going to be much more expensive than actually taking care. So you're going to pay a lot for that if you're not taking care and protecting your data. So it's much more expensive to recover and revert your data than to actually expand with security. Now, in terms of fundamental critical infrastructure, what is that? Critical infrastructure is everything that deals with critical operations. For instance, the steel industry, oil and gas platforms, energy. So these critical infrastructures, why is that important? Because the damage is much greater. So for instance, I mentioned the pipeline in the US. It's an oil company, and they were without um, any provision of oil for quite a while, and that created a panic. And the severity and the impact is also greater. So we also noticed some attacks in the health sector. We have some reports that have jeopardized the operations of hospitals and can actually contribute to the number of deaths. So an attack in a critical infrastructure is has a greater impact, and we have some figures to corroborate that, showing that targets are more and more those critical infrastructures, like I mentioned. And how can we avoid an attack to our critical infrastructure? Not necessarily just by protecting that critical infrastructure. That's why I'm highlighting this attack to this American company called Pipeline, because the attack started with the accreditation process. They stole some login, and they locked the oil pump afterwards. And if you're not able to charge that, you're not able to sell that. So you had to stop, halt the production. It started with an IT attack, but actually had an impact on a critical infrastructure. So we're going to be showing how with digital transformation and sharing of data, that paradigm of separating the critical infrastructure it started to be shifted because you need information to make the best decision possible. So what's the secret here is to improve the security, to look for new technologies of protection. We're also going to be addressing some usage cases, and why am I hearing that more and more now, and we didn't hear about that so much if data protection was always important for companies. It's basically about thinking about the Chinese wall representing the traditional security, which will be like antivirus software. So let's say that for traditional safety, that would be important and with multi-layered protections. But when we refer to cloud, for instance, or a shared environment that is shared on cloud, the very physical cloud shows us that a boundary or a barrier is not going to sort it out anymore. Because I'm sharing information in a cloud environment. So that's why we need to look for new protection technologies so that we can, with this technological development, also progress in terms of data protection and then make the most of our technology with safely. So that's a usage case. If you need to use a cloud environment, and we're getting into Gartner zero to trust concept. So if you, what do? You start to restrict access because it's not up to the perimeter or boundaries of your company. You don't necessarily know who's accessing this data. So what's the challenge here? Is to use this cloud environment but you don't want to delegate this to the service provider with access to your information. So it's great if you can delegate the infrastructure, the growth process, because you can outsource that, but you want to ensure that your data on clouds, uh, you want to control who accesses it or not. So it's the zero trust concept, basically knowing who is accessing your data. And Thales technology is going to help us with that because we're going to be able to do through cryptography and key management for those who don't know. So for you who are not part of the IT world, let's imagine cryptography as a doorway, and then you have the keys and the password to get into it. So with cryptography and key management, you're able to insert your data into a cloud, but you wouldn't leave this key in the cloud. The key would be with you, and then you're able to ensure that only people that you authorize will gonna have an access to it. Even if it's a public environment like the World Health Organization or Google, you can ensure that this data was shared, but you're only going to provide this access yourself. And we can explain a little bit better later on, but it's a usage case that we're addressing. Let's say I need to adopt this digital transformation when I move to a cloud, but I'm not sure how my data are going to be protected there. We are able to help you with that. So we're noticing there are many laws arising. We have more than 1,600 laws for data protection in the world. And why is that? Because if you need to share data, and I even joke about that, I was watching a lecture the other day that the data protection law is not about restricting using data. It's actually a law that's going to allow you to share it safely. For instance, we have in the general data protection law that you can share data if it's really of the interest of the owner. So, for instance, you have a governmental agency that is asking for the data for protecting creditor. That service protection is going to be based on this data protection law as soon as its purpose is really favorable for the owner. So we have some rules that might seem restrictive, but we also have some items in the law that provide you to share this data. So how can we help them with that? So Gartner forecast that in 2023, 65% of the information shared, they're going to be backed by some data protection law. And how can Thales help you with that? Through this concept of key management and cryptographic. So you create this digital copies. Let's say you're in the meeting, you wrap up the meeting, and then you store your most important documents in a safe place. So it would be the same for the digital space. So we're creating a layer, splitting down these features. So it's managing the environment. Those who manage the environment is not going to manage data. So meaning that different people have different access to different layers. So once again, technology here is helping technology. Technology is helping this digital transformation process. Like I mentioned before, our usage cases for those who manage infrastructure but also clouds, they're only going to see cryptograph data. So as you can see on the screen, this data are only be accessible for those who have the access or the right to access it. So all the managers have access to this data because they have admin privilege. And when I'm referring to the admin, I'm not saying you should be suspicious, but they are usually the most common vectors for cyber attacks. And they want to hackers want to have admin login. That's how they do with ransomware. That's why they move so quickly. So if they have an admin access and the admin access have an easy access to data, they are able to cryptograph that, like using ransomware. It's going to make the cyber attack life much easier. When you remove the data from the manager, and which is there to manage this data, you're protecting not only the company, but the very manager or the cloud provider is not going to have an access to this information otherwise. Now we're going to be talking about this user case that we address the most. We start by talking to our clients about protecting data, thinking about the data protection law, thinking about the need to share data safely, like I mentioned before, in the cloud. And we end up getting to this pathway, which is it's very hard to deal with. A lot of people have implemented many data protection systems, endpoint detectors and response, which is basically next generation antivirus software. So you have this protected perimeter or boundaries, but if all fails, you need to have the safe net for the data. So you have a new protection layer, and if everything fails, that would work. So when a ransomware, a malware try to cryptograph data, they're gonna see that it's already cryptographed, so they couldn't do that again. So there are some technical concepts here that we're using, like white leash and whitelist actually, and to use this as another protection layer, and we're able to explain to you better for those who are interested. But to summarize it, we we try to protect the data closely. So now referring to the actual data protection law, I apologize for the translation speed. He's speaking really fast. So private laws became a fundamental right this year. So everyone is responsible regardless of the data protection law for their own data. And if you're able to become anonymous, you're able to, in matter of fact, say who have access or not to this data. So with that, we're able to talk to clients, and some of them mentioned that their major concern is if they lose the right to have access to this data, or if they are forgotten, if I delete this data, I'm going to lose some statistics because I'm not able to access in the database just the name or the text number. You're going to erase the entire record. So in this anonymization process, it's basically non-revert this process. So we have this feature in our solution that could be pseudo-anonymized, so it have access to those who should have access, and not provide access for those who don't have the right to. But we have there's a full-on developed anonymity concept. So let's say you erase a CPF number and you can replace it by a cryptographed token. So that data is not going to be reverted if you use reasonable techniques. And what do you make out of it? You gain statistics. So you're going to be able to tell what's your target audience, what's the region that you have the most business in. So now you don't need to identify the individual to have access to that data. And even to share with third parties. Let's say you want to share with third parties so that you have these statistics. Should you share all your personal data, increasing the risk for everyone? So we will be able to help you with that as well to reduce the time. I'm sorry I'm speaking faster because I ran out of time, and I'm going to be speaking even faster. So as I mentioned before, the adoption to public cloud and the digital transformation is inevitable. So at some point you're going to have to adopt that. It's like, I know that people, you're gonna know my age now, but it's like a typing machine. When we're migrating from the typing machine to the computer, I thought that we would still be using that. So the digital transformation is similar to that. It's unavoidable. You're gonna have to adopt it at some point, and we're gonna help you. The most important thing, which is to use cloud, but not delegate to the cloud provider the access to your personal data, meaning that you're going to preserve the access to your personal data at home. So Gartner is one of the most important institutes, and it measures technological trends. So Gartner already warned us that either you develop a data protection strategy that is centralized, or you're going to lose your data. So we're working with this platform, this data protection platform, and we're going to be diving into that a little bit later on. And there is another important data which is how they deal with data protection in 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021. So I already implemented LDP. I have already implemented this new risk management tool. But if you look at 2021 and how Gartner understands that you're going to protect your data, you need to have a platform for ensuring your data safety. And 70% will be integrated with the main most important providers, ensuring that which Gartner says, which is to reduce the most, I would say threefold the number of manufacturers that are going to help you with this data protection strategy. Why is that? So that you can have this convergence and that you're able to architect this strategy for data protection. So I quoted Gartner, and he mentioned that by 2025, you're going to notice that you're going to quit this strategy of sharing everything. So you're going to know how and when and what you should share, and you're going to be able to do that digitally if you have a solution that allows for it.
So then it's going to help you on the data access management process. This is a very important point here because we are talking about quantic computing. When you are going to select a service provider to work with cryptography, we have some that are for a very long time on the market, and hackers they have access to it. So if you do have an organization And from 5 years now, this cryptography is going to be broken. So Thales has been on a very long process, and we have been selected as a standard algorithm for cryptography, quantum cryptography. So, what will this algorithm make to block these? A very important point here, we have an event focused on ASP, so we are the single solution homologated by SAP for cryptography and the data. And why is it important? Because if the functionality works properly, SAP, and if you do have a problem in your database, then it's going to ask you to uninstall your solution, and then you have the support. And that is today because we have competitors as well. We are the single solution certified by SAP in order to have provide data protection. So here we have another model, the protection of data that is stored. So what is key here? Zero trust. We have a set of processes and solutions, and within the zero trust, data protection and authentication are two essential technologies. Data protection, I'm able to assure those who will have the permission to access the data. On the other hand, as for the security of it, I'm also able to assure all the users that will access it through the context authentication and ability. So I'm able to minimize the risk, mitigate the risk of uh, of users that might have been through fraud. So it is essential to have the zero trust so that you have restrictions. So I can restrict those who will have access to the system. So we have data center and data center to data center. So we were talking about the other one, but this is for 5G data centers and critical technology. It doesn't consume band. So if you'd like to understand more about it, we are not competitors with next generation and so on. So we accelerated. As for 5G, 5G you don't have latency. So if there's an hypersec with latency, then it's not going to be okay. So perhaps you might need to have a faster communication, and the security will not limit the easiness of communication. That is for the protection of data in transit. For the communication, data center, data center and main website, and it provides good benefits. Here, the uh, key drivers. So we have here data protection law. There is an increasing answer, and also the normative instructions for those of you who work in government organizations. So here is the data. If we put the data in cloud and if we don't have the control, then you will not have the sovereignty. So what is the differential of Thales? So we were talking about data protection, cloud, file server, and different environments. So if you'd like to have one solution for each one of them, the data, they will need to have a connection technology to technology. But the what is key here, the differential of it, is to do it in a centralized management. So I have a manager on the center, a console of management, and I have different models of data protection that will be applied. We have a cloud, key, and you have a centralized management. So the data will communicate with one another. Having Oracle and MDD, when I mention about it, they will have a connection with one another. So here, to control and monitor. So we have no more time. Thank you. I needed to accelerate because of the time. So thank you very much for your participation. I hope that I was able to cover and convey our services. But we can also schedule a meeting and I can provide you more information about things.